Hello, everyone. Good day. Welcome to Chapter 1, which tackles about the 21st century assessment. So, ever since we entered the College of Education, the art of diversity has always been integrated and multiple times mentioned, whether it is the diversity of the students, diversity of the learning skills, or the diversity of the learning styles. And with that, the outside world is its main cause or its main influence, right? Because after they would graduate, after honing their skills into the different classroom settings in their every degree courses or in their every degree of levels when entering in elementary or whether in high school, after they complete all of these courses and programs, of course, it will be applied into the outside world, and the world has never been static. So it is imperative that the educational system sees that these skills are developed and honed before the learners would graduate. And it was always the process of acquisition and application. That is the goal. After integrating or teaching the students these sets of specific skills, which includes the multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner, to develop their talents and their potentials and the degree courses that they had entered. So, after the acquisition, of course, is the application. And after that application, the educators, are responsible to assess if whether it is effective or not so beneficial for them, such as the theory of Egbert in 2009, the declarative, the structural, and the procedural. The declarative, which is the discrete information, the structural, wherein the students would give their own definition based on their observation, and on the procedural is the actual actions or the actual doing of that specific learning or theory that we get to integrate into them. And to ensure that the education has really done its role, of course, we educators are responsible to measure their level of development, the progress, and even how well they did on that specific field. Thus, the assessment processes and tools must be suited on the needs and requirements of the 21st century because, once again, it varies. There has been a variety of skills that has been developed, and there has been a diversity of learners and learning styles. So, in this chapter, the characteristics of the 21st century assessment will be presented and introduced to us so that we have this guide or blueprint on how to measure these sets of skills that they had acquired. So for our intended learning outcome at the end of this chapter, you should be able to use appropriate assessment tools and techniques as applied in instructional decisions. Because even if we educators know our students so much or have mastered our curriculum, but still we need these instructional decisions to be appropriate and accordingly. Second is to relate the learning outcomes and assessments. There should always be reliability and validity. So these are the sets of the 21st century skills which we are really not ignorant about, diba? But at the same time, we should always take account and never forget that these 21st century skills upgrades and varies as time passes by. So therefore, we needed to make our assessment and our learning activities to be suited into this changing world. First is the critical thinking. It is generating questions, evaluating information and arguments, making connections, identifying patterns, reasoning, constructing knowledge and applying it to solve problems in the real world. So it has always been the higher order thinking skills. Next is the citizenship. It respectfully and positively impacting others and being actively involved in addressing community, national, or global issues, which wherein the lessons it is the lessons that includes sympathy, empathy, and of course harmony with others. Next is growth mindset. Is working through Growth mindset is working through challenges, showing tenacity, perseverance, resilience, self-regulation, and self-advocacy. Because as educators, we do not just serve them lessons for it to be a discrete information. Of course, the students have will be given time in order to assess to have self-assessments, which includes the portfolios, if whether they are really using this knowledge into the outside world and if it is actually effective. Next is the communication, which is the core, no, the core, whether it would be the core of education, whether it would be through verbal, non-verbal, or gestural, for as long as the students could communicate with others, with you, and within themselves. So, communication is appropriately interacting with others to convey meaning and gain understanding for multiple purposes, settings, and audiences, including the digital environment, which we are now today. And at the same time, of course, the teacher needs to be pedagogical herself, no, pedagogical and technological herself in order to give the students the appropriate advice and the appropriate procedures on, for example, how to use the social media properly, how to be a responsible digital citizen. Next is the creativity in generating ideas and approaches to design innovations, construct solutions, build understanding, and express perspectives. So we needed also to feed into the students that creativity do not just comes with the abundance of materials or the abundance of talent and potential, but at the same time, it really includes our wiseness. It includes how we deal with things, even with the lack of resources or even with the lack of talent. One's creativity is determined through one's determination. Next is the collaboration, which is very important, and is working independently, learning from and contributing to the learning of others for a shared purpose in a wide range of environment, or the mere interaction, which includes the engagements of the students. So these sets of 21st century skills are one of the sets of skills that the teacher actually gives or instructs and at the same time assesses. So based on Greinstein 2012, that this belief, coupled with a traditional focus on teaching and learning, will produce a strong and emerging imperative to alter our long-held conceptions of these three: the teaching, learning, and assessment. Because once again, the world isn't static. The world is changing. So therefore, our tactics and our procedures in teaching and learning changes at the same time. So in the 21st century demands a lot of changes and development and re-engineering or rebuilding in a lot of fields, not just in a focus field. So in the field of education, it changes its focus. And then the part of the adjustments is the teacher. So not just the curriculum, not just the subject itself, and not the mere student, but at the same time is the teacher. The teacher's teaching styles and the teacher's strategies in teaching. So, but still, at the same time, the curricula is updated to address community needs. Kasi nga, di ba, we needed to correlate our teaching and the effectivity of our teaching to what is really happening outside the world. That if we get to release all of these students, what kind of citizens will they be? So it's better to be sure that these sets of students will be good citizens, or will be the citizens that could adapt and could actually entertain into the world, into what the world could offer. So, it is focused to make sure that the demands of the 21st century is action. Kasi nga, based on Jose Rizal, di ba, that ang mga kabataan ng pag-asa ng bayan. So, yes, it has been a very big responsibility for the teachers to actually produce good citizens and to actually produce good new heroes or future heroes. So that is why we are inclined into focusing on what the world needs, on what the outside world needs. So if there were many changes on the facets of education, the educational members also calling for change on educational assessment as it is deemed to be of greater importance. Because of course, we do not just teach and teach, we also needed to assess in order for us to know if those sets of learnings that we give the students are actually practiced accordingly, and if it is effective to administer on the next sets or on the next batch. So that is why we have this 21st Century Skills Project has a core belief to enlightenment of goals with learning and assessment that is essential to policy practice. So with that, the 21st century assessment really focus or is really concerned about addressing the 21st century needs. We have this characteristics of 21st century assessment that is somehow being practiced today by teachers on their assessment fields. First is responsive. Responsive is visible performance-based work as a result of assessment, and it generates data to inform curriculum and instruction. So the teacher adjusts instruction on school leaders, and school leaders gives additional opportunity, and policymakers modify programs to cater present needs. So as educators, we are very observant in terms of um, seeing the students' performance, 'di ba? And all of that were recorded, even if some are not actually put into numbers or numericals, but everything is recorded as teacher's reference. And with that, the teacher has her or his reference for adjustments. For example, you are introduced into a diversity of classroom setting, especially in the remote area where you're left with no choice. You needed to fuse all of these students to cater their needs. So therefore, as an educator yourself, you needed to be flexible. So all of these sets of records will serve as your data and your reference in order to really address the learning needs and the learning styles of these students. And there goes the importance or the usage of feedback and formative assessments. Diba? Formative assessments before, during, and after assessments. So these formative assessments can really help not just to you as a teacher in order for you to give your claims towards your students, but also the students could also identify if what are their strengths and weaknesses. So not just a single grade, but students are informed by their purpose, 'di ba? And of course, the transparency of your learning objectives and learning outcomes is very important in order for the student to really follow out of your feedback. And the students will have their sense of self-reflection, peer feedback, and revision for you as a teacher and revision for your students. And this will lead to an effective motivation to the students. Kasi of course, once again, you yourself as an educator, you really needed to motivate your students and try your best not to demotivate them. For example, in terms of the transparency of their grades or transparency of their performance out of this responsive characteristic of your assessment, um, the constructive criticisms, kumbaga, is really need to be used, diba? After giving the grades, here is your score, this is the sets of scores that you have. So, after that, but at least we improve out of the, diba? You really need to be constructive in a sense that You need to be aware of the sensitivity of these students. So, for example, I have a copy here. For example, the teacher really gives his or her students the transparency, yun nga, the transparency in terms of giving their grades, at the same time giving their um, giving their performance progress. Next, we have the flexibility of assessment. So assessment need to be adaptable to students' settings. Diba? Rather than the identical approach that works in traditional assessment, the 21st century assessment approaches are more versatile. So it includes the lesson design, the curriculum, and the assessment. It requires the adaptability to learning needs. And one example for that is the differentiated instruction. Diba? We cannot stick on one instruction only, but somehow that is what is being used up to date. But it is really encouraged to have this differentiated instruction, even if you're a teacher in the remote area. No, di ba? Pag gusto, may paraan. So, best fit for the demands of students since their responses might vary. So, if the responses vary, you as an educator could really know if what type of student this is. Kasi these sets of um, questions, objective questions, can only lead you to a as one decision, 'di ba? But if the instructions varies, um, their opinions varies, their ideas varies. So you'll get to really know them and to alter or modify your instructions and your responses. So assessments should be flexible. And for example, you have a test about multiple intelligences, and then accordingly, you give them activity. For example, um, uh, you group them according to their potential. So for example, the group one are musicians, the group two are very talkative, intra yeah, no interpersonal. They have this interpersonal characteristics, the ability to socialize, and the other one is are dancers, diba? So they vary, and so now they have these different activities, which is what we call the differentiated instruction. Next, we have integrated. So assessments are to be incorporated into day-to-day practice rather than as add-ons at the end of instruction or during a single specified week of the school calendar. So we do not just stick with the idea that these certain students or or will be given the conclusion of the instruction or of the lesson itself, 'di ba? So along the process, it should be the life lessons or the life activities, which is very relatable to them, should be added. So it enriches their metacognition, the thinking beyond thinking, diba? It is very important for them to integrate that, especially when they are still students. And it is stimulating thinking, building prior knowledge, um, constructing moving and thinking and about one's thinking. So not just it wasn't just deemed about themselves, but at the same time, um, it is all about other people's feedbacks and opinions. So it allowed them to choose, have strategies, and use prior knowledge and showcase knowledge through different means. So you are going to give them the freedom. It is more on the free will. This integrated characteristic should focus more on the free will of the students, or it was somewhat like suggestopedia, diba? If you have that encounter that the suggestopedia thing, it gives the students the simulation to be more of free of their to be more free of how they are going to deal with things, to attain their own strategies. For example, giving formative assessments rather than summative assessments in order for them to know if how far could they be or how far could they go, and do not just stay on one single goal, diba? Next, we have the informative. Now, the desired 21st century goals and objectives are clearly stated and explicitly taught. So, therefore, the students display their range of emerging knowledge and skills because they really have that innate knowledge. The exemplars routinely guide students toward achievement of targets. So, that's the goal, to set their goals, diba? So objectives, strategies, assessment methods, and reporting process and the like should be clearly aligned. Should always be aligned. Because if it is not aligned, then that is not credible, and you are not credible yourself. So as students, it builds their skills, innovate learning, and information communication. So when the students kasi really knows even if it is just it is just obvious or is existing to some students who are really dedicated, especially on the middle school. There will really be instances that only some students are um, are associated with the drive to know if what is your learning style, or what could be your what could be their learning approach, diba? And what are the learning objectives of the teacher, what are the expectations of the teacher, and really tries to reach it. But as to the other students that was less motivated, diba, it is your duty to really motivate them. And with that, the we should really apply the 21st century skills under the informative. Whether you comprehend or you listen, whether you do not comprehend, but just they need to listen to what is this certain objectives that you wanted them to attain, about what is the certain goals. Kasi at the end of the day, for sure they'll be motivated. It will only depend on your approach. And so the skills and the technology, the life and career skills, they learn logical sequence in the process, and complex learning takes time. So it is not that instant, but it should be frequent, 'di ba? Kahit there will be times that they won't listen, there will be times that they do not have the certain interest, but as an educator, you should not just stop and be the source of information always, 'di ba? Be the more knowledgeable all the time. And the students show steps they go through to peer and teacher for review. So their steps, their ways on how they did that, 'di ba, is sometimes being recorded in order for the teacher to know if what are the sets of thoughts that come up with your mind, why you come up with a certain product. And as to your peer, or as to their peer or to their classmates, they could follow that, they could follow their ways, diba? A sense of interaction. Next, we have this multiple methods, diba? An assessment continuum that includes a spectrum of strategies is the norm. Spectrum of strategies, meaning we do not just stick on one method, but on multiple methods. Kasi nga, there is a diversity of students. So therefore, there is diversity of learning styles. So the methods, the strategies, and the plannings that we have on ourselves should also vary. So the student's demonstration of knowledge through the method used by the teacher. So the student's demonstration will always be based on what is the method the teacher wanted them to use, or what is the method that you introduced to them. So, for example, you've given them tasks, projects, performance, and portfolios. Once again, we needed to integrate the importance of the multiple intelligences. For example, they were good in drama. They are you wanted to test if they are good in terms of ano, or they are weak in terms of knowing themselves. So you give them, administer them to make a portfolio and such, and the like. Next, we have so many. The communicated. I on this On these multiple methods, it actually also includes the authentic assessments. The authentic assessments, in order for you to know their to know their personalities and characteristics at the same time. And the recognition and appreciation is really prevalent in the process, and the products of learning students' knowledge vary, so do not focus on one way on assessing them. They do not just focus on one way. There could be lots. Kasi nga, di ba, even in college, it was integrated and practice na. The final requirements could be, for example, the drama, uh, na ka ng, uh, when you get to, to versus with other, with other courses. Yeah, that. I know you know the answer. That one. Next, we have the communicated. So, communication of assessment data is clear and transparent for all stakeholders. When we say all stakeholders, it includes the students, it includes the administrators, it includes the teacher, and of course, it includes the parents. So, the results posted to database with standard-based community available and comprehensible to all levels. Diba? Like for everyone. We really needed to impose transparency to the teacher, to the stakeholders, to the students, to the parents, and students informed on routine progress. So not just their progress last year, but their progress almost every day. Because that can really give them the motivation and the drive to either seek more or to recognize and appreciate their efforts. And parents can access progress and assessment data. So why? Obviously, the parents needed to monitor the progress of their students in order for them to also help their kids and the teachers. Kasi, di ba, the learning really starts at home. So, therefore, these certain individuals or these certain parents or guardians need to have the full access to these certain information in order for them to also follow if what is already the progress, and if in any circumstance there has been problems, they could fix it at home. So, the educational community recognizes students' achievement beyond standardized test scores and large-scale measures, and the traditional and authentic. Authentic will never be disregarded and recorded to the 21st century skills assessment. Next, we have the technically sound. Should be technically sound. So adjustments and accommodations are made in the assessment process to meet the student's needs and fairness. So it demonstrates that what they know and how to apply it. What they know and how to apply it. So once again, going back to the theory of Egbert, diba? The declarative with the discrete information. For example, I have a pencil. Ah, it is, for example, I have a pencil. Ay, sige, mag-example na lang ako. For example, this is a hair clip. That is the discrete information. This is a hair clip. Now, on the structural, kasi we have the declarative, the structural, and the procedural, di ba? On the structural, I would say that this hair clip is used for clipping the hair. Yeah, so that is the structural. Their knowledge. This is used for clipping the hair. On the procedural, this is how to clip a hair. So, di ba? How you do it. How to do it on the procedural. And that is inclined with the technically sound characteristics of the 21st century assessment. The students get to demonstrate, di ba, their learnings and how they learned it. So to be used in the real life situations, not just as a theory. So from book to reality. And to be valid, the assessment is measured with when the assessment is valid. When it is measured, it is aligned with the learning objectives, with legitimacy and integrity. So that is how it becomes valid. And at the same time, it is reliable when it is precise and technically sound, consistent in the administration and interpretation of data. So that is how we could say that our assessment is technically sound when it is valid and reliable, and the students have the chance to demonstrate their learning, for example, at the same time as the reporting and the like. Next, we're down to the last, the 21st century eighth skills in assessing and assessment is systematic. So the 21st century assessment is part of the comprehensive and well-aligned assessment system that is balanced and inclusive of all students, constituents, and stakeholders, and designed to support improvement to all levels. So it is very self-explanatory, no? So when we say systematic, it is really comprehensive and well-aligned from the word system itself. So that really includes or deals with the stakeholders and the likes, the administrators and the teachers. Really plan it well, the curriculum and the program. So these are the sets of the 8 essential guide for assessment activity of educators to be aligned with the skills and and demand to align the skills that we ponder and we develop among the students, to align it to the 21st century demands that we really need for today. So the product of us is the effectivity of us. So that would be all for the 21st century 8 characteristics of assessment. Thank you.
So next topic to be discussed is instructional decision and assessment. In a classroom context, assessment is the gathering, interpretation, and the use of information to support teacher decision making. So kung ano ba ang pagdidesisyonan ng mga guro, ito ang uri ng assessment na gagamitin nila. Formative ba, diagnostic, summative, or etc. So remember, the major objective of educational assessment is to have holistic appraisal of a learner, his or her environment and accomplishment. Holistic means looking into something as a whole, not just into a part. So educational assessment encompasses the total educational setting and not limited to the teacher and student engagement. So take note that the holistic appraisal and the total educational settings. So in decision making, we have three phases: before, during, and after teaching. So according to Bloom 1970, the educational assessment process starts in analyzing the criterion together with the teaching learning environment. It is done to determine the effect of the environment to the teaching learning situation, after which the kind of evidence that are appropriate to use for assessment of the individual are set. This helps to determine the strengths, weaknesses, needs, and personality characteristics, skills, and abilities of the learner. So let us now discuss the first phase before starting teaching. Ano-ano ba ang dapat pagdesisyonan ng mga guro bago sila magsimula sa kanilang pagtuturo? So we have here the decision to be made and the source of information. So here's a decision to be made. Meron tayong context to cover during the following day, week, month, grading period, and so on. So dapat meron tayong content. Abilities of the students, considering the cultural background, interests, and skills of the students, and planning the teaching activities. And material appropriate to use with the students, learning activities that will engage both the students and learning and the teacher and the student as the lesson is being taught, learning targets that the teacher wants to achieve as a result of the teaching, organizations and arrangement of the students in the class, and considering of the lessons and activities. So, paano ba yun makakamit? So, here are the resources of information. So, So, first is informal observation of students during class. Diba, as a teacher, dapat i-observe natin yung mga estudyante natin during class kung kung may malalearn ba sila sa atin, kung ano yung mga expression nila, di ba? Conversation with students, previous teachers. So, dapat makikipag-usap ka sa teacher nila sa una. And scholastic aptitude test results, students pass grades and standardized test results, and knowledge of students' personal family circumstances. So, this is the important thing, diba? Dapat meron kang personal family circumstances sa mga student mo para malaman mo kung ano ba talaga yung problema ng student mo, kung bakit sila hindi nakikinig sa'yo, or maybe because may family problem sila, kaya sila ganon. So, that is the first phase before starting teaching. So, dadako na tayo kaya sa during teaching. So, the decision to be made are students learning on the what and how the lesson is presented, improvement needed to make the lesson work better, what feedback to give each student about how well the student is learning, readiness of the students to move to the next activities as planned in the learning sequence. So, ito po yung source of information nila. Paano mo ma-achieve tong decision to be made. So, observation of a student during learning activities. Students' response to question the teacher asks them. Siyempre, para malaman mo if nakikinig ba sila sa'yo. Observation of a students' interactions, diagnosis of the types of errors the students made or erroneous thinking and the students are using. Look for alternative ways to teach the materials. Identify if there are students who are not participating in acting appropriately. Now let's proceed to the last phases, the after a teaching segment. So here are the decisions to be made. How will the student achieve the short and long-term instructional targets? Strengths and weaknesses to be given as feedback to parents or guardian of the students. Grade to be given to each student for the lesson or unit, grading period or the end of the course. Effectiveness of teaching the lesson to the students. Effectiveness of the curriculum and materials used for the lesson. So here are the source of information. Paano sila so, where is classroom tests, project, and observation, interviews with the students, standardized test results, observation of each student classroom participating, review each student's homework results, review each student's standardized achievement and scholastic aptitude test results, review information about students' personal family circumstances, informal observation of how well the student has attained the intended learning targets, summarize of the class performance on the important instructional targets, summarize of the class performance in the selective questions on the standard test, summarize of how well the student liked the activities in the lesson materials, summarize of the class achievements of the classroom test that match the curriculum. These three phases are understandable naman kasi estudyante tayo before, so nakikita natin ang ginagawa. Kahit ngayon, estudyante tayo, nakikita natin ang ginagawa ng mga teachers natin during, after, and before sila mag-start sa kanilang pagtuturo. So, parang obserbahan din natin, and that's all. And take note that data used may be from informal assessments such as observation from interactions of teacher and learner, and also through formal ones such as given of actual case problem for calculation as what was mentioned. So that's all.
Good day, everyone. I am Jane Vilibara from BEd 2, and my topic is 2.2 Assessment in Classroom Instruction. So, according to Lin and Gronland 2000, the relevance of assessment in instructional decision by classifying the varied assessment procedures according to use in classroom instruction. So, we have 4 categories of assessment in classroom instruction. The first is placement assessment, and the purpose of placement assessment is to measure entry behavior. So, a placement assessment is a standardized test or evaluation used to determine a person's skills, knowledge, and abilities. Next is formative assessment, and the purpose of formative assessment is to monitor learning progress. Formative assessment is a method used by teachers to evaluate students' understanding and learning progress, providing feedback to improve teaching strategies. Third is diagnostic assessment. This identifies causes of learning problems. So diagnostic assessment, it is an evaluative process used by educators to assess students' strengths, weaknesses, and prior knowledge to meet individual learning needs. So last is the summative assessment. So the purpose of summative assessment is to measure and of course achievement. A summative assessment is a comprehensive evaluation conducted at the end of the learning period to measure students' overall understanding. According to Lin 1999, informed decision making is education in education is a very important because of benefits it can bring about enhancement of students' learning and development. Next is the types of educational decision. According to Kubizin and Borisht, 2002, classified the different educational decisions into 8 categories. So we have here the instructional. The, The decision is normally made by individual classroom teacher as necessary to meet the targets or objectives set during classroom engagement. Decisions are reached according to the results of tests administered to a class. Example: after a test was given by the teacher, the result is not so satisfactory, thus the teacher may decide to reteach the lesson using a different strategy so as to improve the learning and met the objective or the target set for that particular lesson. Next is the grading. It is usually based on teacher-made tests. Grades are assigned to the students using assessment as one of the factors. Example: a quarterly grade is based on the following: results of the teacher-made test, class participation, projects, and attendance. Third is diagnostic. So it is made to determine a student's strengths and weaknesses and the reason or reasons. Example: a teacher gave an essay test. The teacher noticed that the students were able to write more than 5 grammatically correct sentences, but the coherence of the ideas contained in the paragraph is poor. So the result shows that the students still need more help in understanding the principles of writing a good paragraph. Fourth is selection. So it involves accepting or rejecting the examinee based on the results of assessment for admission or qualification to a program or school activity. The decisions are made not by classroom teachers but by specialists such as guidance counselors, administrators, or the selection committee. Example: college or university entrance examination, choosing school representative for a national quiz bee. Next, we have the placement. So it is made for a student has been admitted to school. It involves the process of identifying students who needs remediation or may be recommended for enrichment program of the school. For example, a diagnostic test on English and math were given to freshmen to determine who among them may encounter difficulty in these areas. Those who will get a below average scores will be included in the remediation program to help the students cope with the lesson in English and math. Next is guidance and counseling. It utilizes test data to assess students in making their personal choices for future career, and help them know their strengths and weaknesses by means of standardized tests. On the other hand, teachers may use the results of sociometric tests to identify who among the students are popular or unpopular. Those who are unpopular may be given help for them to gain friends and become more sociable. Example: the NCAE or the NCAI helps to identify which career path the students may pursue that matches his or her interests and skills, whether academic, vocational, or technical programs. Next, we have the program or curriculum. It is made not at the level of the teachers but on higher levels such as division, regional, or national level. Based on the result of the assessment and evaluation, educational decisions may be reached to continue, discontinue, revise, or replace a curriculum or program being implemented. For example, the decision is implement the K-12 curriculum in order to avoid mismatch among graduates and the industry and to be the par with the curriculum implemented in the Philippines neighboring countries. And last is the administrative policy. It involves determining the implications of resources, including financial consideration, in order to improve the student's learning as a result of an assessment. It may entail acquisition of instructional materials, books, and etc. to raise the level of students' performance in academic or non-academic or both. For example, to conduct a remediation class, additional budget is necessary for the logistic or the classroom instructional materials, assessment materials, etc., and also the additional pay for the teachers that will handle the remedial classes.
Now let's talk about the outcome-based assessment. Knowing what is expected from the learners by their teachers at the end of a particular lesson helps them to meet those targets successfully. In relation to this, teachers who have set clear targets for their lessons will be guided accordingly as they deliver their lesson through instructional learning activities to meet the desired outcomes. Thus, all assessment and evaluation activities must be founded on the Identified Student Intended Learning Outcomes or the ILO. These ILOs should be identified and clarified with students so that it will be an effective teaching-learning process as the teachers commence the learning activities through delivery of the lessons. Teachers establish clear learning objectives for their lessons, students gain a roadmap for success. By understanding what is expected of them, learners can more effectively engage with instructional activities, ultimately achieving desired outcomes. By involving students in the identification and clarification of these ILOs, educators create an environment conducive to effective teaching and learning. The collaborative approach fosters engagement and promotes a more meaningful educational experience for all the people involved. Next is the student learning outcomes. Student learning outcomes is the totality of accumulated knowledge, skills, and attitudes that students develop during a course of study. And these serve as the basis for assessing the extent of learning in an outcome-based education or the OBE. Outcome-based assessment must be continuously done during the entire teaching learning both by the teachers and the students to ensure that the activities are aligned with the expected outcomes set for the students by the teacher. Providing feedback, including the results of assessment, is important to identify the next steps or to be done by the teacher and student toward the realization of the intended learning outcomes. The student learning outcomes is the provision of constructive feedbacks coupled with assessment outcomes assumes importance in delineating subsequent actions for both teachers and students, thereby facilitating the attainment of envisioned learning outcomes. Now let's talk about the sources of student expected learning outcome. So outcomes or targets for every lesson is expected to be defined and clarified by the teacher at the start of the course or the learning activities. This is necessary as both the students and teachers will be guided as to what steps should be taken during the course of the teaching learning activity. There are 6 factors that need to be considered in crafting the student expected learning outcomes. First is mission statement of the school. Second is the mandated policies on competencies and standards issued by government education agencies. Third is competencies expected by different profession, business, and industry. Fourth is the development plan and goals as well as the current trust of both the national and local governments. Fifth is the current global trends and developments so that graduates can compete globally. Sixth is the general 21st century skills focusing on the following. First is the oral and written communication. Second is the quantitative reasoning ability together with scientific methodology. Third is the analyzing, synthesizing, and developing creative solution. Fourth is the use of technology. And fifth is the information literacy. So next is the characteristics of good learning outcomes. It is important to define outcomes as clearly and explicitly as possible. Good learning outcomes give emphasis to the application and integration of the knowledge and skills acquired in a particular unit of instruction, such as the activity, course, or program, and emerge from a process of reflection on the essential contents of the activity, course, program, and etc. First is a good learning outcomes should be very specific and use verbs. By being very specific, it informs students of the standards by which they will be assessed and ensure that students and instructor goals in the course are aligned. Second is, it should focus on the learner. Rather than explaining what the instructor will do in the course, good learning outcome describe knowledge or skills that the students will employ and help the learner understand why that knowledge and those skills are useful and valuable to their personal, professional, and academic future. Third is, a good learning outcome should be very realistic. Good learning outcomes are realistic because it should pass students to be able to demonstrate the knowledge or skill described by the learning outcomes at the conclusion of the course in the way learning outcomes establish standards of the course. Fourth is, a good learning outcome should focus on the application and integration of acquired knowledge or skills. Good learning outcomes reflect and indicate the way in which the described knowledge and skills may be used by the learner now and in the future. Fifth is, a good learning outcomes prepare students for assessment and help them feel engaged in and empowered by the assessment and evaluation process. Last, or the sixth one is, a good learning outcome should offer a timeline for completion of the desired learning.